just bring up kind of one thing that I really feel is not brought up about the effect of racism that has on people of color. And this was a problem that a lot of people brought up that we were interviewed. They're saying, I'm not comfortable being friends with white people because of lack of shared experiences and because they're unable to understand my experiences. So automatically after grade 2 or grade 3, we come into cliques, like we automatically just become friends with people of similar background or just immigrants in general or anybody of color, indigenous people, but not necessarily white people because I feel like they don't relate to me. And this is something that I feel like is not really brought up because of lack of education and conversations or just our ability to talk to each other regardless of our skin color or our background. We are causing these problems. And of course there's lots of reasons. We all know racism exists, but this is something huge because we can try to, educate everyone, but if constantly we're just going into our cliques, and I can say the same thing for me in high school, when I really looked at my circle of friends, they were all people of color. I had acquaintances that were white, but I never really had friends that I would hang out, that I would talk about my experiences, because I didn't want to take them home. They'd be like, what is this food? Or because I did have that experience. They didn't like the food. They didn't appreciate the fact that, somebody wore cultural clothes, or they didn't understand that. Or you would just express, oh, my dad's gonna kill me, I didn't do my homework. He's not actually gonna kill me, I'm just saying that, I'll get in trouble. Or oh, I got bad grades. So little things like this that they were unable to relate with people of color compared to white people. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's really important.
Thank you very much. Next we have Maurice Swisser, citizen of the Mississaugas of Adderville First Nation, and a member of the Sons of Jacob congregation in North Bay, Ontario. He was the first Indigenous student at Trent University and the first Indigenous publisher of a daily newspaper in Canada. Along with journalist, he served as Director of Communications for Assembly of First Nations and the Union of Ontario Indians, and has been a professor of Indigenous issues at a number of post-secondary institutions. Earlier this year, he was appointed Ontario Human Rights Commission. Thanks very much. Welcome.
There's the name on my driver's license and another card in my wallet that says that I'm 160008701. Some people for short call me 16. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Could you speak a little louder?
I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. These are opening remarks. I told the student ambassador at our earlier session I wasn't going to talk about racism in Canada, I was going to talk about racism by Canada. There's a significant date. I don't know how many of you know the date. Everybody remembers July 1st, other significant dates, but January 26th, 2016 was a historic date in Canada. And on that day, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found the state of Canada had racially discriminated against First Nations children by virtue of the fact that it had funded, still funds, child welfare on reserves on an average across Canada of 22% less than provincial children's aid societies. That's a landmark event that should have been on the front page of every Canadian newspaper. It should have been the lead item on the CBC National News. And it should be a date that's in every textbook, history, social studies, all sorts of courses in Canada. And the fact that it went unheralded or unannounced says a lot about the climate in this country, unfortunately. It says that Indigenous peoples are not red or brown, we're invisible. I encourage people to start looking at how these oversights and omissions can be reversed. Actually, the government of Canada has been asked to comply 3 occasions to that ruling by the Human Rights Tribunal, and they have not yet even responded. So that says a lot about this country. And the good news is that we have a human rights tribunal that would hear that case.
Thank you, Doug. Next, we have Balpreet Singh Gopari. He received his law degree from the University of Ottawa after training with a petite disability in human rights law firm in Toronto. He became legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada in 2009. His practice focuses on human rights law and religious accommodation. Balpreet Singh has helped solve several key accommodation issues for Sikhs in Canada, including the accommodation of the Kapan in courthouses in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, and on VIA via train, as well as Canadian embassies and consulates internationally. Serves as a spokesperson of the WSO and is regularly consulted on Sikh issues in Canada by national media.
So I was to reflect on how racism has changed over time, and I was going to start off, my initial reaction when I got this topic was, yes, it has changed. But since I got that topic, we have things like the FU Star K, the turban poster at the University of Alberta. We've seen just earlier, less than a week ago, an Abbotsford video of a man violently and very racistly accosting someone, videotaping him. We have an arson in Alberta, in which a motel was burned to the ground and had racist graffiti on it. So my initial thought was probably wrong in that things have changed dramatically. I think things have changed, but maybe we're just not looking at the right places. Maybe we're not noticing it in the same way. For my profession, I'm a lawyer. I was looking at the Law Society of Upper Canada. Now, they've been working on race and the law profession, which is, a white-collar job. 57% of racialized lawyers said that they felt disadvantaged because of being racialized. They reported less interviews. They reported not fitting in at their firms. Personally, I know of Sikh lawyers that have said that if they go to a job interview with their beards open, they won't get it, but if they tie them, things are radically different. Even myself, I don't go in front of courts very often. I usually resolve things out of court. But once as a favor for a friend, I decided to go in front of a small claims judge. The small claims judge was looking towards the client, who was obviously not like me, for instructions. He was looking at her, expecting her to speak, and I was like, hello, it's me, actually. So things, are not perfect. Even the politicized climate, we look at, things that aren't necessarily something you can exactly refer to as racism, but there's intersectionality. You have a political campaign that was run on things like banning the niqab. You have the government in Quebec, for example, that has tried to do the Charter of Quebec values. And you have now talk of testing immigrants for how Canadian they are based on their acceptance of Canadian values. So that's not exactly racism, but I would argue that we have to look at it more holistically. FU Star K, the turban. Maybe it's about the turban, but is that racism? I would argue it is, because the next line under it was, if you want to keep wearing this, go back to your third world country. So I think if we look at it as a larger issue of intolerance, and racism as a subset that has certain intersectionality between other things like anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-religious minority sentiment, it's more helpful. I think we're all familiar with the Angus Reid survey that said 68% of Canadians reported that minorities need to do more to fit in instead of keeping their customs and language. I think that's disturbing. Once again, you might not say that that's racism, but there's definitely an intersectionality to it. But then there's a positive story. If you look at that same survey, 53% of respondents from 18 to 34 said that it's a good thing to encourage minorities to keep their customs and language. And so I think really the solution is education and exposure. So when the Quebec Charter of Values came out, it was interesting that the surveying found that the strongest support for this what was essentially a racist and intolerant charter was in areas that had the least number of minorities. So the solution, like I said, is exposure and education. So when the U Alberta posters came out, the Sikh community, my organization, decided to take a different approach. We went onto campus and we did something called Turban A. So turban, comma, A. And it was just about tying turbans on whoever wants to have a turban tied. And when you're having that turban tied for the 7 to 10 minutes, you actually get to meet a Sikh, you get to feel what a turban feels like, and you get to ask any uncomfortable question. For example, I know many of you are probably wondering, in the summer, does it get hot under there? If your head's itching, how do you itch your head? Do you sleep in that thing? And all those are completely normal questions. But we're afraid of offending others. So actually engaging in education is really important. So I'll conclude on this point that we need to call it out. We need to actually identify things, even if they're not exactly racism, they don't fit that race box. We need to call it out as intolerant. And the worst strategy would be to declare victory and go home.
Thank you very much. Noah Mellison Aviv is director of the Equality Program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Noah has been published, made submissions, appearances, and presentations, and advocated on such issues as refugee protection, LGBTQ2 rights, racial profiling, freedom of expression and religion, and the intersectionality of rights, in particular religious freedom and equality. Noah's coordinated many CCLA interventions in a variety of Canadian courts, including Supreme Court of Canada and the Human Rights Tribunal. She has appeared before parliamentary, provincial, legislative committees, governmental, and public bodies, and provided written submissions. No, thanks.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to mention, I feel bad seeing people standing. There are some empty seats. Don't feel like you're in obligation. All right, speaking of obligations, I'm going to try and do this in 5 minutes. The topic I said I would talk about, because I've done a huge amount of work on it in the last few years, is racism as it concerns policing. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of the previous plenary and that it was running when I was here, so I didn't get to see it. I would have been intrigued to hear their perspective. I'm going to give you mine. As you maybe know, racial profiling continues to plague racialized communities across Canada, regardless of what you might otherwise hear. There's a lot that we know. There is a great deal that we don't know, and that's not okay, because that data can and should be available to members of the public with something as important as this. And mostly I want to try and get to what we can and should do about it, because as Professor James was saying, there is already enough data from across the country, albeit limited, that demonstrates that we do have a racial profiling problem in this country, and a problem generally in the criminal justice system with racism. And so what we can and should do about it, I think, is one of the most important things we need to talk about. But I'm gonna back it up a little bit. Professor James and I actually met at a dialogue that was organized by the Ontario Human Rights Commission this past winter on racial profiling. It was 3 days in which academics, police, community activists, community representatives, government, organizations like the Ontario Human Rights Commission and CCLA, different government agencies, were all together in the same room around a great big monster table, excited, keen, positive about all being there. Let's finally tackle racial profiling. And up comes the LD statesman, Professor Charles Smith, who's been doing this for quite some time, and he speaks, and he says, with a weary sigh, I'm not so excited. I've been here before. I've been doing this for decades. I've been in a room with excited people saying, isn't it wonderful that we have police and government and academics and agents, and nothing has really changed. And indeed, if we look at some of the victims of police shootings in the last few years, we had Jermaine Carby in September 2014 in Peel. Peel chief, as you know, has said we need carding. It's an important tool for us. We've got the shooting of Andrew Loku, another racialized African, I'm not sure he's African Canadian, I don't know where to start to use the term Canadian, somebody living here is not a citizen, with mental health issues. That was the July of 2015, the same quest is coming up. And then the tragic shooting of, they were all tragic, of direct Abdi by Ottawa Police in July 2016. And Ottawa Police, of course, interesting because they told us at that policy how wonderful the relations were between racialized communities and the police, and that any negativity that was coming out in the room really didn't have any place because in Ottawa everybody loved each other. And I assume, you know, for all my joking, that it's probably true. There probably are good things happening. The Ottawa Police did decide to continue their data collection project beyond the required period of 2 years. I'll get to that in a second. So, very briefly, what do we know? In Toronto, data was not collected in any useful form. The Toronto Star had to go in and demand raw data using freedom of information requests, which were turned down, which they then had to litigate. And when the Toronto Star did its own analysis of the raw data, they found racial profiling. The Ottawa Data Collection Project, well, over time in a second, found that there were disparities between data that was following a human rights complaint that happened almost 10 years ago by Chad Aiken, and the settlement required a data collection project. They did it. They had York University professors do the analysis, and the conclusion, which came out just this week, said there are disparities. There is a disproportionately high number of people who are racialized, in particular African Canadians and people of Middle Eastern descent, especially men from those groups who are stopped, greatly disproportionate, and a great number of people from those groups who are stopped and not arrested, not detained, no charge. In other words, stopped for what turns out to be no reason. And yet, says the study, that doesn't prove racial profiling. That proves disparities. So the very question we were asked to address, is there racial profiling, what's going on? We don't know that. We just know that there are these disparities. So our organization takes a different view. We think that is indicative of racial profiling, that the onus is now on police to demonstrate how all these stops might be, each and every one might be justified or appropriate. And also very recently, there's data that came out from the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent that visited Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax, and essentially came to the same conclusion using the limited data that they had, but doing interviews as well. And I'm going to come back to this issue of data in the probably 2 minutes that I have left. But we know, based on media reports and things that community groups are doing as well, that issues of racial profiling plague people in urban and rural communities, that it happens in Northern Ontario, despite what was recently said by the Chief Justice Marie, in Halifax, in Regina, where in fact we have a chief who says crime is an important practice, because in Regina want us to do good policing, and they're doing that to good policing. And the groups that are affected also range a little bit. African Canadians seem to be affected throughout the country. Indigenous people are affected in particular in areas in some of the northern and remote communities, and people of Middle Eastern descent seem to be affected. Certainly that was shown in the Ottawa study. So what can we do? What should we be doing? What's been done? Some of you may know, I assume you talked about it, so I'm just going to touch on it, that a new regulation was passed in Ontario. We, members of the Commission, and a number of other bodies were extremely active in working with the ministry and consulting with them and pushing for certain changes. And in fact, the regulation that was passed has certain important protections for rights, certain important prohibitions of racial profiling, certain amount of data that's going to be released, and a limited amount of accountability measures, and a certain amount of data that's going to be released, although not in the form in which we would necessarily want. There are seats up at the front. The number of policies that exist across Canada are limited. And indeed, this regulation that was created in Ontario does not address some of the key issues, such as important accountability measures, data retention and privacy issues, but actually calls on local police forces and police services boards to create those policies. I think looking at, if we harken back to what Professor Smith said to us with that weary sigh, that we've been here before, and we're still here, and we're still talking about police shootings, and we're still talking about people being stopped for no reason, being told that this is good policing. What we need is to stop talking about training. We hear a lot about training. Training is good. It happens at the front end. It happens for a few days. And then police are released into a police culture, police practices with police goals and proactive policing that undermine a lot of that training and goodwill that may be created. What we need is accountability measures. The public needs to know what is happening. The police need to be releasing data, raw data and disaggregated data, so that we can probe for questions around, are there disparities? Is this racial profiling? And communities, regardless of whether or not they should bear yet another burden, are going to have to step up and start looking for that information amongst themselves. Whether a community has the opportunity and means to do a scientific, empirical, quantitative study or not, doesn't change the fact that the communities are the ones who are hearing the stories. And those stories need to come out and they need to be told, and they need to be told publicly, because with that knowledge, we can say to the Americans, it's not just you. We can say to ourselves, it's not just the Americans. We need to hear each other's stories, and all the good and forward-thinking people, of which there are many in this country, who hear those stories can come to understand what may not be happening to them on their own flesh, but is happening to their neighbors and their friends and people in this country. So I'll stop there because I'm sure I've gone over time, but I understand we're going to have a discussion to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Noah. Maurice, I'm thinking here if you could expand a bit on this idea, what I call sometimes the visible invisibility of certain groups, and Indigenous people being one. And in terms of the lack of profile, the lack of the here in terms of the not making the headline, and this issue that you mentioned. Could you elaborate a bit?
Well, we actually have a very high profile. We represent upwards of 60 or 70% of the inmates in federal institutions. We represent upwards of 40 to 50% of the children in care across Canada, higher at any time than during the residential school era. Does this mean that Indigenous people make inherently bad parents, or that we're inherently criminal? Of course not. We have the highest community called the Kanjik in the Northwest Territories, has the highest rate of suicide in the world. We have Canada used to pride itself during the Chrétien era of being identified as the best country in the world in which to live, based on the United Nations Socioeconomic Index. And some people segregated out the Indigenous statistics, and Indigenous peoples living in Canada ranked about 64th. We were right next to Borneo, if I remember. So we are very visible. The former Attorney General, Sheila Fraser, said that there was more reporting required of First Nations communities than any other segment of the population. The problem was that nobody in government read them. So in a way, we're very visible. It's just when there are solutions to these staggering visible statistics that all of a sudden we become invisible, and our voices become silent or muted. I'll just tell you, I'll end my comments by telling you two things. One of the last times I heard Elijah Harper speak, he was speaking in Ottawa, a very strong Indigenous leader. And someone asked him what was the thing that needed to happen to affect change in these issues about the Indigenous people seem to be bearing a disproportionate brunt of. And he said Canadians have to stop expecting the government to do the right thing. And I'll tell you a related personal anecdote. I spent a lot of time speaking with students and teachers across Ontario about treaty issues. By the way, if you don't know what reconciliation looks like, it's that picture in the middle of a 252-year-old treaty that permitted the peaceful settlement of Canada. That's what reconciliation looks like. I'll be glad to discuss it with you after. And I was talking with these very bright young students, and this one young student who I was told I could anticipate a lot of questions from. She really articulate and bright and German. And after she had heard all these things I had talked about, she said, "That's awful. What are you going to do about it?" I said, "No, my dear. That's where Canada has to go. That's what reconciliation is about. Our minorities are fast becoming not minorities anymore. As one of the police officers mentioned, he is now the chief of police in a jurisdiction in which upwards of 45% of its citizens were not born in this country. In another decade, 67% of them will not be born in this country. And yet, Canada is a national jurisdiction in which the media leaders, corporate leaders, political leaders still act like this was the era of Johnny MacDonald. So we have to find ways to engage people who hold those positions of authority, and they still are, by and large, white men. We have to find ways to make them understand that it's in their best interests that reconciliation starts to happen more quickly and not through lip service with all Canadians, that everybody needs to be respected. Not one child should go to bed hungry in a country in which there's so much wealth. Not one. One is too many. One is too many.
So I'd like to hear all of you respond to the question. So, would education and training do the trick? Then I kind of got you saying, referencing that, but schools and universities, like today, this afternoon earlier, the police talked about doing police training and sending them in community. So, would that help? And if it would, how should we structure it in order for it to, or do you think it does not?
I think it really depends on the environment that you're talking about. As mentioned, I think accountability is very important when you're talking about policing. I think when it comes to an education environment, it would really help to do some training, some proper training for people actually in the community, rather than somebody just reading something off a PDF or saying that, hey, this is what this culture is all about, but people from that community, from that culture, talking about their experiences and what it actually means. Our organization, we are a nonprofit volunteer-led, so most of the people are youth, and we go out to communities, we go out to schools. Just last month, I went to a school, and it was very interesting because the teacher was, she contacted us saying, hey, our class is always, there's kids always saying racial things, and, they're not getting along, and we just want to explain to them what racism is, what multiculturalism is, and different cultural practices. And we have different people in our organization that are from different cultures, so it really helps that we bring people from different cultures out. But kids are not stupid, they're really smart. They know a lot of things. I was caught so off guard. There was a little girl. We were talking about what racism means and what racial discrimination means and the difference. And the teacher was white, and the girl that was speaking was black. And she, I don't know what she said, but she said basically, oh, people are always so racist, white people are always so racist. And then the teacher was like, no, they're not. And she's like, the teacher was like, I've been called a snowflake before. And then I just wanted to let it happen. So I was like, I don't want to put my input, I just want to see how this interaction will happen. And then the little girl says, yeah, but snowflakes are pretty. And I was just shocked. I'm like, this girl knows, she understands. And she was in grade 5. Those kids know, they understand the difference. If you compare something light, it's always something beautiful. If you compare something dark, it's something ugly. She's like, I've been called a crow before, and you were called a snowflake. What's the difference, So kids understand that. So we do need training. So this teacher, for example, was like, that's not true. So she clearly didn't have any training on racism or other things. And I understand that's why she called us in. But it did worry me that there is a teacher like this, and there's hundreds of teachers out there that don't actually understand racism or racial discrimination or the difference between them and what it means in society and the systemic things that affect in our society. So it is very worrisome, and especially if they're trying to teach about cultural differences or getting along and understanding each other's cultures, that really doesn't help. So I don't know, I'm sure they have teacher exercises and things like that, but clearly it's not working. And this isn't just one example. We've gone to hundreds of schools. We have a lot of volunteers that go to different schools. And this is something that's often brought up. The teachers are not culturally aware of a lot of things. And I mean, it helps that there's different organizations that can help, but clearly it's not doing enough. We need people in the community helping, from that community helping teachers or whoever else that they want to train, rather than just reading a book about culture or whatever.
Education is the key to all the world's problems. People having the right information. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about people learning about the truth, and then the reconciliation is supposed to happen. But people have been educating about what it is to be a good citizen for thousands of years. So we have to rely on other tools to make sure that that education is reinforced. I heard the police officer talking, and I agree about training. Sometimes, and one chief said, "Oh, they get a day of cross-cultural training." That's in a 30-year career.
Yeah.
But the hiring practices, like what are the hiring practices? We're talking about racial profiling. Are they doing psychological profiling when they're hiring police officers and teachers? I got an email from a friend last night saying that she just overheard a conversation, a very public conversation by two police officers who felt comfortable saying in a public place, well, it's a good thing we have Indians up here because we wouldn't have a job without all the problems they get into. We live in a society where people feel comfortable saying things like that in public. And I want my children and grandchildren to be in a society where you don't feel comfortable saying things like that. Now, part of that, I think the response to that kind of behavior is educational. Part of it is political. I think our political leaders need to speak out, including our police leaders, about instances like this. Under our legal system, you're more liable to be fined or reprimanded by police for jaywalking or double parking than you are for hate speech. I mean, to convict someone of hate speech in Canada, you almost have to prove that they held a gun to your head. So there are lots of potential remedies. I won't say solutions. I don't think racism will ever be resolved, because I think it's an unfortunate part of the human condition that we all are wary or suspicious or afraid of people who are different from us. I think there might have been a time in our history when that was a kind of a necessary defense mechanism. But we have to, all of us, it's not just one sector or a siloed response. We have to live in a society where everybody feels that human rights, human dignity is as important as food, as important as a roof over your head. And until we have a society that really feels that those are essential elements of the society in which they want their families to grow up in, we're constantly going to be looking at patching. It's like, that game Whack-A-Mole, where you hit one of these moles and then it pops up over here and you hit it again. It's like a big game of Whack-A-Mole. So yeah, the education is so important, but there are many. It has to be a more concerted, cross-societal effort.
Thanks so much, Valkyrie. And I'm thinking, when I say education, we always think of education, giving information, passing information. But I always think about into what experience are we putting that education, and how would that new education interfere with that that exists in education, and does it work? Ever so often we have some opportunities to look at that. But what do you think, Dave?
Yeah, so I think I tend to agree with what's already been said, largely, that having someone talk about a different culture, reading from a sheet, or even from a book or a PowerPoint, it's very different than engagement. Engagement is really the key, I think. When you have that experience with someone, it's very different than learning about it from a book. But I see that the space for having these sort of discussions is decreasing. We don't necessarily have the space to have these different conversations, like that safe space in which no one has to be afraid of, being called out for being intolerant. Because there's a lot of questions that I think are necessary to ask. I've told the story many times before, but I'll tell it again. I met with a government minister, and I said to him, so any questions you might have? And he said, yeah, I have a question. He goes, why do all of your people live in the same place? You all go and live in the same area. And I thought that was pretty bold of him to ask, so then, all right. So if you're arriving in Canada and you have a different look, for example, a turban, you want to go somewhere where you're understood. You don't necessarily have the skills to explain yourself, so it's just easier to go where everyone should understand. Because if someone asks you, what's that thing on your head, you may not have the skills to properly explain. And the minister scratches his chin and he goes, yeah, so what is that thing on your head? Like, there are members of your caucus that have turbans. I'm surprised that you've never asked, but hey, let's have this conversation. We have that conversation, and I hope he walked away with a little bit more understanding. But having those discussions, even though you might work with someone for many years, you don't feel that you have that space to ask those questions. The other thing I want to talk about is empowering people to tell their stories. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is one really amazing initiative that I thought was premised on this, having people tell their own stories and having them heard. Often the people that are having these experiences are the ones that aren't being heard and they don't have a platform to be heard. For example, some of the most egregious instances of racism and discrimination that I encounter in my job are with international students. So these international students are coming here paying huge fees, and then they need to work in order to support themselves here, often working illegally, and they're going to places where they're essentially being abused, being discriminated against, and they don't have any way to express those stories, and they're afraid of expressing those stories because they're afraid it might affect their immigration status, et cetera, et cetera. The same could be said for other subsections of our, new immigrant communities. So creating spaces for these stories to be told and having these stories heard is really, really important. And that's what I think I'm talking about in terms of education, not just reading from a book or having a presentation, real engagement.
Real engagement, sometimes you can spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks with a community of people and still end up, what might happen is your ideas are reinforced that they are different, and those differences are something that you can live with. Or you might leave with a real understanding, quote unquote, that of that education that you wanted to have. So there's no way of knowing how much it's going to work, but we have to try.
Can I
However,
ask you a question?
yes, and I was coming to you with, yes, because I noticed you talked about accountability, and I have another question I was going to ask. So I started, then I come up with the other question.
I think generally we need to distinguish between education and training, which of course it's a good thing. Of course it's good for people to learn. There are some big limitations, which I'll get to in a second, but we also need to ask ourselves, who's doing the training? Who's doing the education? Who's setting the curriculum? Are we demanding that when police get trained, that training is established, the curriculum is established the way we asked for? The Ontario regulation doesn't cover all the issues that we wanted. We wanted privacy issues to be a part of the training. They're not. We wanted community groups to be involved in setting the curriculum around racial profiling. That's not going to happen. And there are logistical and technical issues. They do this training across the province with many different police services in many different police colleges. But some things can be done by video. We do have new technologies. When I went to, I and a number of others were able to go to the Toronto Police College to see some of their training, and it wasn't actual training that we were there to see. It was the communications department portrayal of their training, and we got to meet with some of the trainers. And even in that training, there were some wonderful things that were conveyed to us. But we heard from police about, we heard from them about sort of trying to mitigate situations of stress when you're dealing with mental health. This was a mental health context. But we also heard a lot about how important it is, how much they're teaching now about disengagement. And they gave an example of police actually having to do an exercise where they get a phone call from somebody who owns a coffee shop, and this guy sitting out front, and maybe looking in as a mental health issue, and so police get called in, and they tell us proudly how excellent it is that, when the police officer, that the correct answer is that when the police officer goes up and talks to the guy on the bench and finds that there's nothing going on, he walks away. That's the end, and then goes and talks to the person in the coffee shop and says, everything's good, we don't need to do anything further. And I hear this story, and we know about the experiences of people with mental health who are terrified of uniform, and who have these interactions with police for no reason whatsoever. And I said, why disengagement? Why not non-engagement? So it's obvious to anybody who works with racialized groups or mental health issues in policing. It wasn't obvious to the people who were doing public relations on the training that the police college is doing, that non-engagement needs to be the starting point, because people want to be left alone, especially people from those communities who are used to having police tap them on the shoulder and say, what are you doing here? Who are you? Where are you going? Is everything okay? And those questions may not bother somebody who's never had that as a negative experience or as a recurring experience. The other thing that we need to think about when we talk about education is that if we put all of our focus on that and we lose sight of what the material conditions, for fear of sounding like a Marxist, but if we think about the material conditions of people's lives, young people in school are not stupid. And they may hear about and engage with other people from other cultures, but some of those kids in that class may be living in communities where they're not safe. They may be dealing with issues of poverty, hunger, precarious housing. And some of them are also going to go out onto the streets, and police are going to be saying to them, who are you, where are you? And those encounters are going to create a reaction and have an impact on them in terms of their sense of belonging in general mainstream Canadian society. Some of them, as a result of those encounters, may also get a criminal record, and disproportionately, those are going to be the racialized youth. Only we know that the white kids at Lawrence Park are walking around with marijuana or more in their pockets, and they're not getting the criminal records. So what is happening? What are the material conditions that are going to affect? So all the training and education in the world is a small piece. That's all I'm trying to say. It's a good thing, and we need to ask the questions like who's doing it and what, but it's a small piece. I'll leave it there.
Okay. I want to engage the audience, but I still have one question. If you permit. We've been hearing within the past few months the whole notion of Canadian values. Someone running for leadership concerned about Canadian values, etc., and a number of my friends think it's something coming from across the board. So I wondered, what is Canadian value? And how do we measure it? How do we identify it? And who has it? Who holds it? And how might we start to think about it? Could you take about very, very, very briefly, because we want to get our audience, anyone who wants to take that question?
I think if we call ourselves a multicultural country, we have to have multicultural values that are obviously, as long as they're, understood and we understand each other's culture, then that's how we can implement it. So if a multicultural value was something that, it's okay for a family of 10 or whatever to live in one house, then we have to understand that some cultures do practice that and others might not. So respecting that and not, so I think it really just comes down to understanding multicultural, but again, that comes with the training, it comes with a lot of different things.
Okay.
My brief answer is there's going to be tension in our answer. Because if we talk about multiculturalism and if we talk about equality in the broad sense, which some people call equity, we're going to run into issues of communities that want to observe practices that don't respect equality of women or of members of the community. And those tensions are going to be inherent in our existence as a democratic society, and democracy is also one of our values, that we want to make autonomous decisions, self-determination for ourselves. there are going to be tensions. I don't think we can easily resolve it in a definition.
If I could just add, just touching on that, I think that's a very important point. But in order to solve those problems, like for example, when it comes to forced marriages, so if we want to solve this issue, we can't just be like, hey, here's a law, which we already have, that you can't force someone into marriage. We need to actually have people in the community go out to the community and be like, this is why forced marriages or whatever are wrong, and actually explain to people from the community, which is something we really lack. We need people from the community going out and giving evidence, whether it's a movie, film, whatever, saying that this is wrong because of blah, 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 instead of just saying this is a law that's always been there and now it's just going to be harsher. If we don't have that communication, then it's not going to work.
Thank you very much.